I'm gonna go back. How do I go back here?
I don't know.
Well, anyway, what I wanted to do is talk about the ranked choice voting and why are we even talking about it. I want to give a disclaimer. Since this is a church meeting, I'm going to try to be as neutral as I can. We're not supposed to advocate for any position on anything, so I want to try to make this an information meeting. So don't ask me which way do you think you should vote. That's going to be up to you. So I touched my screen. The first question I want to ask is, in our system of government, who should win an election? You know, we have a representative government. Who should win an election? Do anybody want to answer that question?
Who gets the majority of the voters' vote?
Okay, that's one answer. Does anybody know what the law says?
No.
I thought it was something about the electorate or something.
The law in almost every state and federal reads the person with the most votes wins. And in Massachusetts, that is for sure and the real answer to that is the person who gets the most votes. Now, what's the problem with that? What if that person doesn't represent the majority of the voters, which is what Janice said, that it's possible that the person with the most votes doesn't represent most of the people. And I want to go through some examples. The first one is from the congressional district that we all live in. I think Southborough's included. Maybe not, but because that's Worcester. Anyway, in the election in the 2018 primary, there were 10 candidates to replace the retiring representative. Realize in Congress, the only time you really have an election is if somebody retires. And as a result of that election, you can see over here all the number of votes, the percentages for the candidates. The person who was declared the winner had 21.6% of the votes, only 122 votes ahead of the next person who had 21.5%. And you look at all those and you say, well, I don't know, that doesn't look too fair. The winner happened to be Lori Trahan, and there was a recount because of this 122, not because of that. But she was the winner. This is a primary. And then in the general election, obviously in our district, she wins automatically.
At 3 o'clock? Okay.
The next one is an election from this year. It's another congressional House seat, the 4th Massachusetts seat, which is in the Newton area, which happens to be where my daughter lives. And there was a lot of information, a lot of talk about this in the local paper when I went over there. Again, there was a vacancy because Joseph Kennedy decided not to run. The election results were very similar. Again, the person who won had 22.4%. It was this guy, Jake, I won't say his last name. And the deal is he was a very conservative Democrat, won in a very liberal district, because all the other votes were spread over here. And from what my daughter said, who's active on the school, all the school PTA, and knows a number of these people personally, that people in the Newton and that area split their vote kind of between a number of good candidates. The people where Jake was from all voted for him in his town. And again, because he had the most votes, he won. And he's going to be in the election in a couple weeks, and he's going to win because he's a Democrat running in a very solidly Democratic seat. And the third example was really the one that got me thinking about this, and this happened a number of years ago. And the first election was in 2010 and then again in 2014. And this is for the governor of Maine. I don't know how much you know about Maine, but they have a long history of independent candidates, including senators in Congress and representatives and governors too, that they do have two political parties, but they have many, many independents, and independent candidates actually win. So back in 2010, there were 5 candidates, and that included the incumbent. I don't know if you can see, the guy who was the incumbent won with less than 50% of the vote. He had like 47 or 48% of the vote. Anyway, in this election, which was a general election, there was 38.1% voted for a Tea Party Republican. And remember, back at that time, the Tea Party was organized very strong and could generate all the votes for Republicans. And then you see the other votes. And the guy who won was a guy by the name of Paul LePage. And he ran again in 2014. Then he won with 48% versus 43% for the next person. And during the 8 years he was governor, he had 642 vetoes. And the last couple of years, he vetoed everything just out of principle because the legislature would not do some tax cuts he wanted to do. The legislature was independent and Democrat, and he was this Tea Party Republican, and nothing got done. But he didn't have a mandate. He only had 38% of the vote, roughly a third of the vote. And consequently, nothing was getting done. So what's going on? The candidate in all these cases, and these are all right close by, the candidate won without getting at least half the votes. And because of that, the candidate doesn't always represent the electorate. I can't say about Lori Trahan, I don't know enough about what she believes in and what motivates her. But I do know in Newton, the guy didn't represent most of the electorate. And certainly that was the case with LePage in Maine. But they got the most votes, so they won. And how does that happen? Well, the candidate appeals to some solid base. And because that base is usually off on the side someplace, it shifts control of government from the center off to some extreme. And that's one of the reasons our government is so polarized. And this started a long time ago on the national level, back in the 60s, when we had guys like Ralph Nader running, or George Wallace was running. And because he was there, he split the more liberal vote. A Republican was elected, and without a majority. And also because you got to appeal to this base group, you get a lot of negative campaigning. The campaigning becomes around issues important to the base and not important to the election. And that's certainly what's going on this year. It's really tough to sort out what candidates think because they keep calling each other names. And finally, especially like in those primaries, it discourages people from voting for who they really want, because you realize if you vote for somebody who's not likely to win, your vote is a wasted vote. But that's important because if the minority parties get enough people, they become a legitimate party and they can do certain things. They can be on ballots and a lot of other stuff. So in a way, it takes some power away from some fringe groups that they can't get the support they need because people realize they're wasting their vote. So the solution that this ballot question is looking at, let's have the candidate win by getting over half the vote. Now, there are a couple of ways of doing that. You could hold a runoff election. The problem with the runoff election is who goes to the next round. If you look at this Trahan example, there are 5 candidates within 6 percentage points of each other. And if you start out with 5 candidates, you're going to have at least 3 or 4 rounds of balloting. And that adds a lot of time. You need about 2 weeks around to allow people to get ballots printed and all that other stuff. You would certainly do away with mail-in voting. It would be a mess. Yet runoff elections are used. They're used in France. I'm not sure how. We were there on a trip when they were having one of their intermediate elections, and so I know they do it. I'm not sure how. And I also
I actually have some French examples in the thing. It's a single runoff. So if we have time, I can explain it. But there's only.
Why don't you do it now?
Oh, okay. So I need to share my spreadsheet.
Can you do that?
I think I can share over yours.
Or should I just stop sharing?
Let me see. We'll see what happens. iCloud Drive.
Yeah, there's also a special election going on right now in Georgia, and it probably will go to runoff in January. A lot of southern states will use nonpartisan primaries followed by runoff elections.
Oh, okay, that's great too. Nonpartisan primaries are a really good and cool thing too.
Well, they're not nonpartisan; they're multi-partisan, which is what you're seeing dynamics like in Georgia right now. There's 2 Republicans and the Democrats. The 2 Republicans are trying to run to each other's right, which is giving more success to the Democrats.
Cool. Oh, interesting. So in the French system, you only have 1 runoff because the French think that like they give a lot of power to their state, and so they say they have a really high threshold for democracy. Like you must have a majority. And there were kind of 2 famous presidential elections. The first one I talk about is in 2002, and it was notable because Jean-Marie Le Pen was in 2nd place in this election. And he was running for the party, the Front National, or National Front, and it was a far, far right party. Like, in fact, at the time, now it's more of a mainstream party, unfortunately, but at the time it was really seen like the Nazis. And here you have, in the first round of votes, the French tend to not vote strategically. You'll see there's like tons and tons of parties that gets votes, but only the top 2 go on to the 2nd round. And so you have in blue, of course, because the US is weird compared to other countries. In most countries, blue is a conservative color. So usually center-right parties use blue, and then red is a socialist color. And democratic socialists tend to use red. So like in England, the Conservatives, the Tory party are blue, Labour is red. Here, right, like the Democratic Party is actually part of an international Labour Party group. We use blue and red. So you have 2 mainstream candidates here, Jacques Chirac. If you know France, you probably have heard his name. And he was for a center-right party. And then down here, François Bayrou, who was also from a center-right party. And then usually like the big center-left party, akin to our Democrats, is a Parti Socialiste. And he was just 200,000 votes shy of this Nazi, who only had 16.9% of the first round. Well, he wound up, since he just happened to be the 2nd highest, he actually made it to the runoff. And here you see, like, all of France went, what the heck, and voted in the center-right candidate at an 82% majority. So that actually worked out well for them. but in 2017, there were a whole bunch of party, I'm trying to scroll, here we go. There were a whole bunch of party reorganizations. And if you look at, I have the parties in parentheses, pretty much all of the names are changed, right? You see PS is only way down here, the Socialist Party, and the RPR and the UDF have gone the way of the dinosaur. And it was all fractured. So in the first round, you see the center lefts have a pretty decent amount of following down here, but nowhere near a majority. And you have the center rights, again, up here, with closer to a majority. And this Front National, they got all kinds of good press from 2002 and are now more and more of a right-wing force. And they wound up making it then to the runoff over here, and they got a third of the vote. So here you have in the French section, the French system with its single runoff really does favor radical candidates coming in hotter than they would normally. And over here you see I kind of put the main two blue parties, the main two center rights, and the main two center lefts. And then I just gave them each kind of an arbitrary half of whatever was left down here of the minor parties. And you see, once again, it was much closer between the lefts and the rights. So.
Okay.
So you have to reshare your content and then we'll be good to go.
All right. So that's the one thing. And so you see the biggest issue for me is how do you determine who wins? Taking the top two isn't always the best answer. That's what Pastor just went through. So the other solution people have come up with is ranked choice voting, which is kind of like a runoff election, but you cast all your votes on the same day. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And it does add time to determine the winner, but you're talking about a couple days instead of weeks. So let's talk about ranked choice voting. What is it? On voting day, as the voter goes in and they get a ballot and all the candidates are listed, and they have, instead of having just a place to check one, they'll have a number of columns equal to the number of people running. And so you take the person that you want to win and you put a check mark in the first column for that person. And then if there are more than two candidates, then you go to the second candidate, put a check mark in the second column to vote for your second choice. And then you just continue that all the way down. You don't have to select more than one if you don't want to. You can just pick your top choice. That, as it turns out, isn't a good idea. But the real issue becomes, how do I make my choices? If you look at the examples that I used, it takes a lot of work to learn candidates. Like in our district, Lori Trahan is our congressman, and I don't know much about her. And I certainly don't know much about the rest. So one of the issues is people have to do a little more work. And they not only have to know who's the best, they have to know who's the second best and so on down the line if they do. Practically, what I would do is say, is there anybody I don't want to get in, and mark them off as last, or don't mark them off at all, because then my vote will never go to that person. And look at the top two or three and pick two or three choices. In most cases, that should get a winner. But that is an issue. This system, in some respects, is more complicated. And one of the big downsides is that because it's more complicated, it'll be confusing. And the electorate, especially most of the people on this call, us older folks, the knock is that we won't be able to figure out who to vote for. Now, I'm not sure that's the case, but that is one of the stated reasons not to take and do this. So that's one reason, and the other reason is that it does add a day or two to the number of choices. So when the votes are counted, what happens? Well, in each precinct, the votes are counted now, and if a candidate gets 50% plus one, they get elected and it's all over. But if no candidate gets 50%, then you go to the next round. And this comes in with a second negative, because in order to make this work, you want to take and move all the ballots to a central place. And one of the downsides is that people say moving that and taking it out of the precinct gives maybe a little more charge for fraud. However, we do that now for recounts. All the ballots are already in one place to be recounted. So it's not new, but that is maybe a point of, could be some problem. Anyway, they come together. The candidate who gets the least number of votes is dropped off the ballot, and they take his votes and they allocate them to the second place candidate. And so normally the person at the end has only a few votes. That probably won't change things very much. But if nobody gets over 50%, they go to the next round, they repeat it, drop the person with the lowest number of votes. His votes, his second place votes are allocated. And if perchance the person who was last voted for the next person that's dropped, they go to his third ranking, and that gets done. So you can see as this goes on, if there's 5 or 6 rounds, there's a chance you're down doing people's second or third choices. And if, like I said in the beginning, you only want to vote for one person, that your ballot then is dropped. It doesn't count, which is no different than today. If you vote for a minority party, after the first ballot, your vote doesn't count anyway because you didn't vote for the winner. At least under the ranked choice system, if you select somebody as a second choice, your votes still count. The benefits that are, this is taken from the election material. The winner is likely to represent the majority of the electorate. It's not likely you're going to have minority groups running things. And that should lead to more positive campaigns. If you think about it, if you trash somebody, you know, have a lot of negative campaigning, and that person comes in third, you're going to rely on that person's votes to get elected. And if you trash him so bad that he votes for that they pick the second person and not you, you lose. So one of the ideas is that you'll have more positive campaigning. And in fact, there was an article, I think in the Globe, where this has been in place. A couple of the candidates actually went around and campaigned together because they knew in the end that they were going to count on each other's votes. And because the other thing is you start focusing on issues and not people, because you want to say, here's what I believe in, vote for me, not for the person, you know, as the votes start rolling up. And hopefully you get more participation because your vote is going to count. Even if you want to support some minority, eventually your vote will be counted in determining who the final winner is. Now, Maine has been using ranked choice voting for since 2018. In that case, in the governor's election, LePage was term limited, so we don't know what would have happened. But there were 7 candidates, and in that case, that election, for the governor's election, the first round candidate actually won. They had a House person running at the same time. He was an incumbent, he had the most votes on the first round, but didn't have a majority. And after 2 more rounds, he was gone and somebody else took his seat. And in that case, again, he was a very conservative Republican, had roughly a third of the votes and was taken out. It took 8 days to determine a winner in that case, so it didn't happen right away. Some of the publicity on ballot question 2 said it'll get the money outside of the elections. That hasn't happened. In the Maine example, there was still a lot of money, and there was still a lot of what we would call dirty campaigning, especially by candidates that were appealing to a bloc, minority bloc, and they were trying to get outside voters. Another question that's come up is the ranked choice voting constitutional? There were several challenges, 2 at least, in federal court, and in both cases they were, the court said, yes, this is constitutional. One of the issues is if the Constitution says the person with the most votes wins, and they said, well, in this round, the person with the most votes didn't win, and the state held, yes, we're just counting votes a different way. And the court said, yeah, that's true. It's just a different way of counting votes. And from the Boston Globe article about this, whether it was a good thing or not is the jury's still out. Let's see. Now, for a wrap up, I want to do a little example about how this works. This is a quick video, and hopefully I'll go to this link. Come on. Here we go.
Pick your favorite color.
The ranked choice voting way.
Instead of voting for just one color, you get to choose your top 3.
Purple is the best, but if I can't have purple, I want blue. And if neither of those wins, I guess I
Can't hear it.
Okay.
Now,
Oops. Uh-oh. Let me see.
There it is.
And I'm going to turn my volume up here.
That's not going to work. So, Frank,
Yeah.
when you shared your screen, did you, can you just go to the link and bring it up on your browser? That's going to be the best. And then I'd stop sharing your screen, copy the link, paste it into your browser. And then when you share the screen for your browser window, you'll have the ability to click like optimize for video. And that will give you the best audio quality.
I'm not sure I know how to do all that.
It's a pain.
Do you have it on yours? Can you bring it up on yours?
Let me see.
Because I'd have to
give
go
me a
find your email.
Oh, I was muted. Okay, I can do this.
So I'm going to stop sharing. It's a cute little video. It takes about 1.5 minutes and it shows how this works. So
Only pay for what you need with Liberty Mutual and
voting way.
Instead of voting for just one color, you get to rank your top 3.
it's still quiet.
Well, purple is the best, but if I can't have purple, I want blue. And if neither.
Instead of voting for just one color, you get to rank your top 3.
Well, purple is the best, but if I can't have purple, I want blue. And if neither of those wins, I guess I can live with orange.
Now, let's count up everybody's votes.
Under ranked choice voting rules, it's not enough just to get the most votes. You need a majority.
More than 50% of the votes.
Purple's ahead, but it has only 7 votes.
It needs at least 11 to win.
So we eliminate the color in last place.
Sorry, Orange fans, we're going to your second choice.
2 more for green,
1 for purple.
but no color has 11 votes yet.
Still no majority.
Bye-bye,
blue.
1 more for purple,
4 for green.
and we have a winner.
The ranked choice voting way.
I'll go to the first, second person goes to the second choice.
Did you get that?
NPR, what's NPR stand for?
I don't know.
Okay.
Did people hear that?
Yeah, that was still pretty quiet.
The visual.
No.
The visual. Okay, so that's what I had. Now, open for any comments or questions.
So who
Anybody?
won? Purple didn't win, green won?
Green won.
won.
Yeah. They had the most votes. I was going to do an exercise with ice cream. and
Can we
let
do it
you
with
all
numbers
vote,
or
but
something simple?
But I couldn't
Oh my.
figure out how to get everybody to vote. If I had figured out how to have each of you vote for,
Your favorite?
I had like 5 kinds of ice cream. We're going to have a party. We'd only have one kind. And we had 5 kinds of ice cream. 3 of them were variations of chocolate plus vanilla and strawberry. And see what happens and see from the people here who would win. But like I said, I couldn't figure out how to do that.
So let me ask some questions, see if I understand what this is we're doing. So I go in to vote and I pick my first choice, second choice, and third choice. Judy goes in to vote and she picks her first, second, and third choice, which are not the same as my 1, 2, and 3.
Yep.
What
Of
we're
course.
saying is that the one that accumulated the least number of votes, they then relook at those ballots and pick off of those ballots what their second choice was, and they re-add up the totals based on the second choice plus what the original first choice was?
Correct.
Exactly.
Yeah, the first choice rules, your first choice votes stay there until your ballot gets dropped. Then your second choice gets allocated.
And then it would drop to the third ballot, it would be the third choice.
Well, second choice for some people, third choice maybe for others. Because remember, you might drop people that it's the first time they've been dropped.
What would happen if Doug did his ranked choice voting and I just voted for number 1?
Your ballot would count for the number 1, and when the candidate you voted for, if they were dropped, your vote would no longer be counted for anything because you don't have a second choice. Your first choice didn't win, so he's eliminated. And then they say, okay, who's your second choice? You don't have a second choice. Your vote no longer counts for anything.
So if we have Biden and an independent, whoever that might be, Green Party, let's call it.
Yeah.
Then we would rank 1, 2, and 3 for them. And there's a potential that we put number 1 would end up not getting in because of this ranking.
And 3 would get in that, everybody said was.
Well, the person that ultimately had the most votes would get in, correct. Deb, you had a question?
What happens, one thing I noticed with early voting, and then the candidate drops out. So how?
That happened, that actually happened in the Newton election. The candidate dropped out. In the ranked choice voting, because the ballots were cast, I would assume they would be counted, and when he finally got dropped, then they would be reallocated. So if he were in the middle, they would stay there, and they may never have been reallocated. As I understand election law, if you drop out once your name is on the ballot, your name is still on the ballot.
But once, as I understand it, once a candidate drops out in our current system, that's it. Like,
No, if he's on the ballot, your votes still count for that candidate.
But they're out. Yeah. So, I mean, it doesn't get allocated anywhere else. That's the difference with this.
Yeah.
Well, you would think so. If the candidate drops out and say like 500 people vote for that candidate, he or she is probably going to have a very small number of votes. So if on the first ballot nobody gets a majority, it's likely that the folks that vote for him or her, possibly mistakenly, will then have their votes reallocated in the next round.
Yeah. So,
given the people that are counting these ballots, this will be a mess. Think of the people who actually sit there at for the election.
well,
The average age must be 75.
well, the truth be known, the proposal, if you read through it, the first choice will be in the precincts as it is now. The ballots will then all be taken to a central place and will be machine read, and the computer will do all the calculations.
Mm-hmm. Even now, machines read the lion's share of the ballots. Like you shove it through that little fax machine looking thing, and only the only ballots that really ever get seen by like human eyeballs, but barring a recount or something like that, are ballots that either have a write-in candidate or have some kind of irregularity. For the most part, when you shove it in the little printer looking thing, the machine tallies it. And then those ballots are still kept. But they're only really scrutinized if they need to be scrutinized.
Yeah, and I think as a money-saving thing, they're not going to get machines that can count all the possibilities for each precinct. They're going to get them for a central location and run them all through at the central location.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So it creates a level of complexity.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it is another level of complexity. Yes.
One thing that I thought I might mention is also kind of a question is that I believe the ballot question only applies to state level elections, like it won't apply to the presidential.
No, that's not true.
Correct.
It applies to everything except the presidential election. It applies to senators and representatives.
Yeah, okay, but it doesn't apply to the presidential.
It doesn't, because it will apply indirectly because we don't vote for the president anyway. We vote for electors that vote for the president, and they'll have to get a majority. But since the way it's set up, there's only one set of electors for the president, or for each candidate. It won't matter.
But still on our ballot, there will be the name of the presidential candidate.
Now, if you look at the ballot, we voted. The name of the president isn't there really. You're voting for electors for the president.
Yeah, but the name of the president is on there. It says electors for president.
Electors for president, yeah, but technically you're voting for the electors, not the president.
Yeah.
And it depends on how your state does that.
Yeah, exactly.
What about
Every state is not the same.
Yeah.
You had a question, Martha?
Yeah, what about a presidential primary?
Again, as far as I know, well, I don't know about the primary. Pastor, I don't think it had in the wording if it applied to a presidential primary or not.
My understanding, it was also on Boston Public Radio today. There was a whole thing about it, and my understanding is that it is nothing to do with the president is affected by ranked choice voting. So I think primaries will still be first past the post, and so will the presidential election.
What about city elections, like mayoral or something like that?
Yeah, it'll apply to city elections unless you're voting for multiple candidates. Like here in Hudson, I don't know about you guys in Marlboro, but we get to vote for 2 or 3 school board people on the same ballot. In that case, it doesn't apply, but in elections like for you guys for mayor, it would apply.
It's very rare that there's that many people on the ballot, I think, right?
Yeah. I mean, there are some people who might say, no, ranked choice voting is not good. And I guess I kind of, maybe I'll be like the naysayer. One of the arguments against it is that the ballot itself could be confusing, that folks won't understand necessarily how to rank their ballots, and then there'll be a higher percentage of wasted ballots, right? And of course, when you're thinking about voting, right, we think of like voting has to be for everyone. And like when we say everyone, we mean everyone. People with all kinds of different disabilities, be them intellectual or developmental, they have a right to vote, right? Folks, you know, who may be distracted. And so there is a concern that it will be too complicated. The other thing too is I think that if you're really partisan, you might say, I don't want this to happen. You know, these kinds of the voting really encourages third-party candidates. So if you're like a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat or a dyed-in-the-wool Republican, and you want the absolute best for your party, you may say, oh, this is bad for us, because right now Democrats and Republicans really like have the market cornered. In fact, if you look, countries that have ranked choice voting by far and away are more likely to have multi-party systems than countries that have like first past the post, which is what we have in like what the United Kingdom has. Those countries that have that have single ballots, they tend to have 2 or fewer parties. So that's.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead, Doug.
Is there any estimate of the cost of what these computers are going to be for each city, or?
I don't know.
You know, that's probably, I'm sure that's public information. I wonder how we can look that up, because you know how a couple weeks ago you probably all received one of those paper booklets that explained everything about the ballot initiatives? Under Massachusetts law, every single ballot initiative has to have a fiscal statement at the end of it. I don't have mine on hand, but I bet you can look it up.
I have one handy. I'll look.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, no, I didn't think about doing that.
Yeah, so in my spreadsheets, everybody loves spreadsheets. Oh my goodness! That was my dog.
What did Jonah do?
He's tossing his rope. He's tossing his toys around because I'm not playing with him. And so he flung this rope toy into my metal buffet cabinet. And
He's so good.
He's great. Yeah, just absolutely. What a gift, really. Just a gift. So I kind of like made up a very simple understanding. So this is like our current system, and this is a hypothetical election, right? And you have, I kind of picked parties from across the spectrum, right? You have the Democratic Party, right, which we understand to be center-left, right? Republican Party, center-right. Green Party, maybe farther left. Libertarian Party, right, farther right. And then the Democratic Socialist Party, right, that would be farther left. And so in this hypothetical election where 500, you have the votes arrayed on your screen, right? So the Democrat wins this election because they just have the most votes. And you have the Republicans have 100 fewer votes, Green, Libertarian, Democratic, Socialists. So in the first ballot, right, under the ranked choice voting, under the first ballot, the Democrat wouldn't be elected because even though they have the highest number of votes, they have the smallest, they have fewer than 50% of the votes, right? And so you'd have all the way at the bottom, the Democratic Socialists at the bottom. So the far lefties are left out in left field. So their votes get assigned. And if you want to assume, right, like if you're like a hardcore Democratic Socialist and you're voting strategically, you might say, oh, well, I really want the socialist candidate but I know my best choice is the Democratic candidate for like policies that I want. So we're just assuming that all of their votes are going to be assigned to the Democrats. So the Democrats should have 510 now. See, in round 2, they're still doing pretty good. Their majority is improving. You can see where this is going already, right? And then who's the next up? The Green Party. Again, if you're a Green Party voter, you're probably thinking, well, the Dems are my best bet for, you know, the Green New Deal, blah, 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 not dredging the oceans, whatever. And so all their votes go to the Democrats. And look, they're getting up. But who's next? But still no majority, but they're closer. But then the Libertarians get assigned. And if you're a Libertarian, you're probably maybe a little bit on the right. I don't know. And say they all vote Republican, and boom, the Republicans win the election. And so that's why, you know, in the, what is that? I don't know what that is. Where's my French? Oh, and here's the 2014 election with Paul LePage. You see, he got 48% of the votes, but Elliot Cutler took 8.4% of the votes, and you know, if all of them voted for the Democrat, which they wouldn't, right? If all of them voted for the Democrat, Paul LePage wouldn't have been in Maine holding everything up. But you see, it's not clearly it's not clearly like the boon for good governance either. Because with this table, you see 70% voted Democrat, and the remaining 30% voted Republican, and Paul LePage still wins. But so it does, you know, theoretically, it prevents this radicalization of government, and it gives these third parties a chance.
On the ranked choice voting, the fiscal consequences of this proposed measure for state and municipal government finances are unknown because it starts January 1st, 2022.
I concur. That's exactly what I read.
Yeah, which doesn't help.
No.
It'll probably cost a little more because you're going to have people at a minimum bring people in to run the ballots through a second time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the cost of having more likely getting a majority of the people behind whoever the candidate is. It's not free.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other questions?
No, this helped a lot because I had a different version in my mind of kind of how this went. So it was very helpful. Thank you, Frank.
Yeah, no, it's fun. It was fun. Okay. And ever since everybody attended, I assume then that nobody objected to using the church as a vehicle to do this.
No, didn't object.
No, because I think it was neutral. You presented both sides, and
And also the church we are actually officially allowed to take positions on ballot measures and on issues. It's candidates that we are not allowed to endorse. And, you know, so we have lots of positions. So Frank, you are like even if you wanted to advocate for folks to vote a certain way, that would be at least legal.
Okay.
Thank
so
you.
now we can all
Thank
go
you,
and
thanks.
listen to Trump and Biden and, on your favorite TV station.
That's right.
Thank you both.
Thanks, Frank.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was awesome. And thanks for everyone who attended.
And Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.